He was just 19, too young to drink, too young to vote when he enlisted, but old enough to make a decision that would define the word hero. On December 4th, 2006, in the streets of Baghdad, a grenade landed inside his Humvee. In a single heartbeat, he made a choice, one that no training could ever prepare you for. He shouted a warning, then he jumped on the grenade. 4 men lived because of that decision, and Ross McGinnis never came home. Before we start the story of a hero, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who was joining us from around the world. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Kid Who Chose Courage. Ross Andrew McGinnis grew up in Meadville, Pennsylvania, a quiet town with more fields than traffic lights. He was the youngest of 4 kids, the kind of boy who couldn't sit still. Teachers called him curious. Friends called him fearless. He was the type to dream of medals or parades. He wanted adventure and a purpose bigger than himself. At 16, when his classmates were talking about cars and parties, Ross told his parents he wanted to join the Army. After graduation, he enlisted. He was 17 when he signed the papers, 18 when he shipped off to basic training. Drill sergeants quickly realized he wasn't the biggest guy in the platoon, but he had heart. He cracked jokes, took the worst jobs without complaint, and always put others first. One of his instructors later said, "He wasn't trying to be a hero, he was just trying to do right by his friends." In 2006, Ross was deployed to Baghdad with the 1st Infantry Division, one of the toughest assignments in Iraq. The city was boiling with tension. Ambushes, car bombs, and IEDs were daily threats. He was assigned as a machine gunner, standing in the turret of a Humvee, the most exposed position in the convoy. Every mission meant scanning rooftops, alleys, and windows, knowing death could come from anywhere. Still, he stayed upbeat. He wrote home about the heat, the noise, the laughter between the chaos. He told his parents not to worry, that he was doing what he believed in. One of his last letters home said, "It is not about being brave, it is about being there for the guy next to you." In Baghdad, that bond meant everything. It was what kept them alive. And in the end, it was what defined Ross's final act. Chapter 2. The Streets of Baghdad, December 4th, 2006. The morning sun burned through the haze over Adamiyah, a volatile district in northern Baghdad. It was supposed to be another routine patrol, if anything in Iraq could ever be called routine. Private First Class Ross McGinnis climbed into his usual spot, the gunner's turret of a Humvee, his M2.50 caliber machine gun glinting under the dusty light. Below him sat 4 soldiers, Sergeant First Class Cedric, Thomas, Staff Sergeant Ian Newland, Specialist Sean Lawson, and Specialist Thomas Bogus. 5 men in a single vehicle, bound together by trust more than armor. The convoy rolled through narrow streets, children watching from doorways, vendors staring in silence. For a few minutes, it felt calm, almost normal. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Out of nowhere, an enemy fighter appeared on a nearby rooftop. He threw a grenade straight toward Ross's vehicle. It arced through the air, bounced off the turret shield, and fell directly inside the Humvee into the cramped space where his teammates sat. There was no time, no orders, no hesitation. Ross shouted, "Grenade!" Then he made a choice. He could have jumped out of the turret and saved himself. He could have ducked behind the armor. But instead he turned, saw where the grenade had landed, and threw himself onto it, pinning it to the floor with his body. The explosion was instant. A flash of fire, a thunderous crack, and then silence. The men inside were thrown against the walls, ears ringing, lungs burning. They opened their eyes in disbelief. They were alive. Ross wasn't he? His body had absorbed the full force of the blast. The Humvee was wrecked, smoke filling the cabin, but 4 men, the Menhik brothers, were still breathing. Later, one of them said, "He didn't think. He just did it." In less than a second, he gave up everything so we could live. Outside, gunfire erupted again as the convoy pulled to safety, but inside that vehicle, no one spoke, because they all knew what had just happened. A 19-year-old kid had done something eternal. Chapter 3. The Aftermath. The convoy halted just outside the blast zone. Smoke poured from the Humvee ES torn hull, the metal still glowing with heat. Medics rushed in, shouting orders, trying to make sense of what was left. Inside, 4 men stumbled out, deafened, burned, and covered in dust, but alive, all of them alive. Private First Class Ross McGinnis was gone. The grenade had exploded beneath him, and his body had shielded his entire crew from the blast. Specialist Sean Lawson later said, "I was closest to him. If he hadn't done what he did, I wouldn't be here. None of us would." Sergeant Cedric Thomas couldn't speak for days. He kept replaying the sound in his head, the click of metal. Ross S. warning shout. Then the instant silence after the explosion. He said it was like time stopped and then suddenly started again without one of them in it. When the vehicle finally reached base, the men refused to let anyone else unload Ross. They carried him out themselves, wrapped to the same flag they all wore on their shoulders. In the following days, their reports came in cold, procedural, emotionless. But between the lines, the truth was clear. Ross didn't die by chance. He chose it. The Army investigation later confirmed that he could have escaped. He had more than enough time to jump from the turret, but he didn't. He saw the grenade. Drop shouted a warning and fell on it. 1 second. One decision. 4 lives saved. Back home, word spread quickly through Meadville, Pennsylvania, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and suddenly everyone knew his name for a different reason. The high school hung his photo in the hallway. The church held candlelight vigils. And his parents, Tom and Romaine, sat quietly in their living room, trying to understand how a boy they raised to be kind had become the man who defined sacrifice. His mother said softly to a reporter, "He didn't go there to die. He went there to protect his friends." And that's exactly what he did. Chapter 4. The Medal of Honor. 2 years after that morning in Baghdad, the story of Private First Class Ross A. McGinnis reached the highest halls of the nation he had died for. On June 2, 2008, his parents stood in the East Room of the White House beside President George W. Bush. Behind them sat the 4 men Ross had saved alive because of the son now gone. The air was silent, heavy with pride and grief in equal measure. The president stepped to the podium and began to read, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Then he paused. His voice softened. He gave his life so that his brothers could live. Private First Class Ross McGinnis was just 19 years old, but his actions speak for centuries. When Ross S. parents accepted the Medal of Honor, his mother held it close to her chest, as if it could bring back the warmth of her son's arms. His father stood straight, tears falling freely as the president placed a hand on his shoulder. "This belongs to Ross," Tom McGinnis said, "but he'd want you to remember the others, the ones still over there." After the ceremony, the 4 soldiers who had survived that explosion approached the McGinnis family. They didn't have speeches or prepared words, only quiet gratitude. Each one embraced his parents and said the same thing: "He saved my life." That medal wasn't just for heroism. It was for love, the kind forged only in war, where seconds decide who lives and who doesn't. Back home in Meadville, the town gathered for a parade in Ross's honor. Children waved flags. Veterans saluted as his name was called. But his parents didn't want people to see him as a symbol. They wanted them to remember the kid who loved baseball, who cracked jokes at dinner, who joined the Army because he believed someone had to. His mother later said, "He didn't die to be remembered. He died so his friends could go on living." And in every sense that mattered, they still are. Epilogue never came home. He was 19. Too young to know the world, but old enough to give it everything he had. Private First Class Ross A. McGinnis never came home from Iraq. But the 4 men who did carry more than memories, they carried his life, the seconds he gave them, the breath he never took. His name is carved in stone now, but his story lives in the space between duty and love. Because in that single heartbeat, he didn't think of medals, glory, or country. He thought of his brothers. That's what courage looks like, not in speeches or headlines, but in a quiet decision made in the blink of an eye. He once told a friend before deploying, "If something happens to me, I'll be okay as long as I did my job." He did more than that. He showed the world what true sacrifice means. And because of him, 4 soldiers came home. Stay healthy. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one. And if you have an idea for another untold story, share it in the comments. Your voice helps keep their memory alive.